Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast. As always, I hope you are doing well. I want to start this episode with a little story. Back in the day, when I first started teaching yoga classes, I used to have these little pamphlets and posters that were printed, and we would go and put them in the local park. There was this small park somewhere behind my house in India, behind my parents' house, because I used to live with my parents back then. And we would go and stick these posters, literally one or two posters across a mile, and hope that people who were walking past it would notice it. And back then, Aham Yoga, which is my studio today, was called daily yoga when I was in India, because for the simple reason that I thought you should do yoga every day, and hence it was called daily yoga. We used to stick these posters, and I really hoped that someone walking past it would be looking for yoga classes. Now, that's honestly how I got started, by sticking literally one or two posters on a tree, on a fence somewhere in a park in India. And that's where I got my first few students. There was this man in his 50s who walked past it, saw it, called me, and became one of my first students. This was a long time ago. This was about 15, 16 years ago, 15 years ago. And it directly ties into the conversation we're having today. On the show today, we have Alexandria Crow, who has been on the Let's Talk Yoga podcast before. We talk about marketing and visibility for yoga teachers. We do talk about social media and how the barrier of entry is so low, it's non-existent. Today, it is so easy to put yourself out there on this digital bulletin board. Yet, yoga teachers, we struggle. So, we talk about yoga and yoga teachers and the medium of social media and marketing. We get into how to change our mindset around it, how to live the yoga authentically while learning this medium. What are some of the common mistakes we make? How to actually get started? What are some actionable steps that we can take, and how to feel really connected with yourself while using this medium? And so many other things. Alex has always been someone who is authentic and who has helped other yoga teachers get more comfortable with putting themselves out there. So she's the perfect person to have this conversation with. So I'm hoping you will get a lot out of this episode. I have linked everything we talk about in the show notes. I really hope that you are on my monthly newsletter. I am sending out a very special announcement on March 2nd. Sorry, April 2nd. I forget it's already March. On April 2nd, there is a very special announcement going out on the newsletter. So I really hope that you are on that monthly mailing list. I send out podcast episodes, special videos that don't make it to social media, as well as blog posts of the month. And it's a curated place for us to connect off this podcast or off social media. So I really hope that you are on the newsletter. I will see you on the newsletter. If you have been a long-time listener of the Let's Talk Yoga podcast, please remember to rate, review, and share this episode with another yoga friend. Enjoy today's conversation with Alex. I will see you on the other side. Hi, Alex. Welcome back to the Let's Talk Yoga podcast.
Hello, hello. It's been so long. I'm so glad to get to do this with you.
I'm glad that we are connecting. It's been a couple of years since you were last on the show. And it's been 5 years since we've been doing this podcast. And we've never done a deep dive into marketing as a topic. And you came to mind. And I personally enjoy marketing. Well, enjoy might be a stretch. I have no issues with marketing and visibility. I see it as a necessary component of what I want to do, a way to live these yoga dreams. But marketing is it's one of those topics that yoga teachers run away from. It gets a bad reputation usually. But I wanted to chat with you because I think it's an important topic, right? It's one of the ways in which we make ourselves visible and we stay on people's mind, and it's what makes our yoga relevant, like the teaching component a little bit. So to kick things off, how do we as yoga teachers, consumers of this medium, just build a healthier mindset towards this topic?
Oh, that is such a big question. So let's start with like a few different points of it. I completely agree with you. I've never had an issue with it either, mostly because it's my background. I have a graphic design degree. I worked in design and marketing for years and years until I was 30 full time. Like those were my gigs, that and sales. So I'm very used to all of those things. The yoga world has, like you said, a really weird relationship with this stuff. And then almost like this funny slant that doesn't work that they keep trying to use in order to market what it is that they offer. And I completely agree with you. It is a necessary evil. And I don't even think it's evil. It's just like money. It's the same kind of idea in the yoga world is like money is a dirty word and everything should be free. And it's just not how it works, nor should it. People look at social media, for example, which I personally look at as I worked before that ever existed in marketing and design. And if you want to talk about like an easy, right? Like no barrier entry point for people to be able, like you didn't have that before. You had to pay for magazine marketing or, newspaper or editorial, or it just cost a lot of money. And there was a lot of barrier to participation. That doesn't exist anymore. Social media is a free billboard for you to participate on. And I personally don't look at it as a place where I'm like sharing myself. If I was going to do that, I'd have a separate personal page, right? Like it's not a place. I'm not an influencer. That is a business. It's a totally different business though than what yoga teachers are doing. But it's such a powerful tool to use to connect with people, to get them to understand what yoga is, what particular angle you're teaching from, what your business has to offer, to really connect with the specific people that are looking for exactly what you do, which is not everybody. But it's so much easier to find the people who are looking for exactly what you offer. But I think yoga teachers have a hard time. One, I'm sure that we probably agree on this, that like yoga is a difficult thing to market and advertise and do any of that with compared to like a frying pan, right? Or like a shower head or a sweater. It's not a tangible object. So you actually have to learn to describe it and its benefit and what problems it aims to solve and who it's for, without just being able to show, like, my joke always is, those infomercials where the egg slides right off the nonstick pan. You don't have that ease of use at first. Now, long term, it's really easy to describe, but you've got to actually find what it is that you're talking about and have the dexterity design wise, verbally, to get that across to people over and over again. And then the yoga world has this like really funny thing that I always joke about is, as a designer, I would give the yoga world an F in terms of their grade on how they're communicating what yoga is, because we spend more time trying to dismantle people's preconceptions about what yoga is, aka if you just take the most common one, right? Like, I'm not flexible enough to do yoga. And then they're frustrated that people have that misconception. Like, you're giving it to them. They're not getting that out of the ether. They're not going back and like looking at really like old imagery from forever ago, getting that idea. They're getting it from the marketing that's being put out right now. And there's all the like kind of anatomy reasons we've talked about in previous sessions that limit people's participation. But they think they're not flexible enough because you're showing them a picture that when they look at it, they go, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. And so my joke always is that it's like, if I was hired to do marketing for like a sushi restaurant, let's say, and I kept using pictures of bowls of spaghetti, and then when people came in and looked at the menu and went to order, they were like, where's the spaghetti? Where's what's happening in your marketing? And you're like, oh, we do sushi here. And it's like, but, I don't know. It's probably easier to pull people in with sushi at this point, but like, it wasn't. Let's just say, be like, well, we pulled you in with this because, we thought you'd be more into it. And now we're going to try to sneak this in on the back door. And it's like, you say it's not about the poses, but then we use nothing but the pose. You say it's not about flexibility, but then you use imagery that requires higher degrees of flexibility than the typical person will ever have. So it's like it's like not a passing grade for marketing. And so then it gets really frustrating because then people focus on the wrong metrics. They're like, well, but the pictures of me doing handstand get the most likes. I'm like, likes don't pay your bills.
Yeah.
likes don't bring people in the door.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually different metrics that bring people in the door. And when you ask them, like, is your marketing converting? They're like, no, nobody's coming. And I'm like, it's not because they're not interested. It's because you're not marketing to them or talking to them about what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
So then they get a really bad taste in their mouth about what it is that they have, think they have to do, because they're like, I don't want to perform, but that's what gets the most likes and the most comments. I don't want to feel like a performing seal. And yet that's all I know how to do on this medium. And getting people to kind of give that up takes a minute, because it's scary. It's the known. Imitate each other rather than figuring out what will actually work. And they look out and they think, oh, that person's got, hundreds of thousands of followers. They must be making a lot of money and be successful. And I'm like, what if I told you they're not? Because they're not, more often than not. That's an influencer metric, right? That's not the same as what you're looking for as a yoga teacher or a yoga business.
There's so
long explanation.
No, there's so much there and there's so many different tangents we can go into. But to go back to what you started with, right? The barrier of entry is so low. It's free, and there are so many options. I remember I started hanging posters in the park, and this was back in the day when I still lived in India, and I was too embarrassed to hang it myself. So my then boyfriend, now husband, I would stand 10 feet away and he would go stick it on the park boards. And that's how I started, hanging posters in the park. And nowadays it's effortless to put yourself out there. So I think that, you're right. The barrier of entry is non-existent. But there is this, I've noticed this habit of yoga teachers where we stand in front of classes, right? And we do our thing, but we're so scared to be seen on a different medium. And I think there is this misunderstanding of it's got to be easy. This type of work is... There's a lot of effort involved, and it's real work. It's like a second job in many ways. And not all yoga teachers need to market themselves, right? It depends on if you're self-employed like you and I are, then it's non-negotiable. But if you are working for a studio, then it becomes optional and depends on your setup. But are you saying that social media today you can't do without it? Or can you?
You can if you work for someone else, right? And they're not requiring. So it's a weird landscape. 20 years ago when I, was getting started. I mean, it was 17 years ago now. Social media wasn't even a thing really, except Facebook, and it wasn't being used for this. So you could get away with it back then because it was word of mouth. And it was the labor you put in person, and you absolutely didn't need it. It wasn't even available. Nowadays, it's really different. It appears. Now, I don't work for studios anymore. Like I don't teach in them. I teach online exclusively. And that's my choice. It's my personal choice. It's the way I like to do things. Everyone has to do things the same. The sky's the limit. That's what I spend so much time with people on, is like, you don't have to follow this status quo way that people are doing things. You can do it in whatever way you want that works for you and is sustainable. But if you work in a studio these days, there's this weird thing studios are doing where they're prioritizing people's social media following in order to hire them, which I think is really short-sighted for the studios, because that doesn't convert. Just because somebody has a tremendous following online doesn't mean that anyone will come and take their classes, because you don't even know where that following is locally.
It could be global.
You're hoping that they've got people in your... Precisely. And then people follow people for funny reasons. Like they don't necessarily follow them because they ever want to go participate. They're more a fan of what that person's life looks like, or the outfits they wear, or whatever, like there's just no assurance that that's going to convert. So there's that. So, if you're playing that kind of game, it's like, well, if you want to get hired by a place, then that requires you to do that. First of all, I'd ask you why you want to work there, because if that's their metric, that's a funny metric. But there is that barrier. And then the other part, like you were saying, is for you and I, it's a non-negotiable because we're self-employed. It would be really difficult. Could I do it? Yeah, I used to. I didn't use social media nearly as much when I traveled a ton because I didn't have to. I met people in person. I added them to my newsletter list. That was a marketing list, and
Hmm.
off I went. But there's a ceiling on putting people on that. You've got to have somewhere to draw them from, and your
Hmm.
public classes aren't always going to be like the biggest place to draw people from or the most sustainable because you're just not going to have as many new students as you would need to grow that list. So for you and I don't think I think it's one of those where I'm like, you'd be silly not to use it
Yeah.
and get out in front of people. But if you work like a studio that does all the marketing for you and they don't require you to have a following or to do anything, then no, you don't need it. So it really depends on your set and setting. And I guess that then goes to like, if you work for a place where they don't require you or it's not needed on your end, are you going to be there forever? And if you are, fine. If you're not, you're going to have to transfer to another place that's like that because you're not going to be bringing people with you. They don't convert from studio to studio really at all. So there's a lot of considerations, but I'm just always like, why not figure out how to use it? If it's free. And it is. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It is uncomfortable and difficult work, and it takes a lot of actual yoga to use it well. Like you've got to really, at first you are really vulnerable, just
Hmm.
like when you first started teaching classes. Like it's really vulnerable to stand up in front of people and to put yourself out there, especially when you're not nearly as sure about anything that you're doing as
Hmm.
you end up being long term. But I think people think of social media a lot of times as like I joke that they're painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling or like the Mona Lisa and it's so precious. I'm like, oh my gosh, this stuff disappears if it's a story in 24 hours. It's not precious. Neither
Hmm.
is even the post on your wall. You can delete it or hide it at any time. Like it's not precious. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. And not everyone's thinking about you or looking
Yes.
at your stuff or like pondering why you've been saying it. And their response to it is oftentimes their own. There's a lot of
Hmm.
projection coming from the other side. So don't even when people criticize or like are
Hmm.
all head up about something, I'm like, they're reading tone into it that isn't there or
Hmm.
perspective that isn't there because their own brain is interacting with it. So it's one of those where I'm like, try to loosen your grip on it. And then it's so powerful. Why not use it?
Hmm. Hmm. Couple of things. One is not a question. The first thing is just something I'm sharing that we do at our studio is we make it optional for teachers to create content. And it is completely voluntary. And we have a social media manager who sends out some ideas and gives them a deadline of, can you do this
Mhm.
in this 3 weeks, 4 weeks? And if they don't, they don't. It is optional. We still, as a studio, create
Oh,
content without them and have left it to be voluntary. The downside of that is 90% of the time, nobody gives us any content. But the second
yeah.
part of that
Yeah.
is we try to explain to them that the students who are consuming this on the other end, we want to highlight you and your classes. But it's
Yeah.
as a studio owner, right? It is a forever challenge to get people who are
Totally.
not comfortable with the medium, who are not interested in the medium, and most importantly, their livelihood doesn't depend on it, right? They don't see it the same way.
Mhm.
And then we do other things like group
Right.
shoots where we all come in once or twice a year and we get some footage and we try to stretch that footage as best as we can. But
Yeah.
it is, it's genuinely challenging, right? Because we don't have requirements of you have to have a following. We don't. But that's not a question. That's just something I'm sharing that no matter how much we try, give them
Yeah.
ideas, give them everything, some people just don't want to deal with the medium. But it is this, and what I've noticed, why I'm saying sharing this is what I've noticed is there is this attitude of it has to be perfect. And I'm more be scrappy, get
Yes.
it done, get going. The more you do it, the better you will get at it. That's my attitude. And uh, get scrappy and
Mine
keep
too.
going. Yeah. But this attitude of it has to be perfect. I'm being judged. And like you said, it is the yoga itself is present in it in such deep layers of accepting
Mhm.
how you show up on that medium
Mhm.
and not getting
Yeah.
tangled with other people's expectations. These are strangers on the internet. The people who love you will still love you if you wore the wrong outfit and did something stupid online for a moment. So I think it's how
They
do
don't
the
care.
question I'm trying to get to is how do we practice the so many layers of yoga in there when it comes to being visible?
Yeah. It's something I spend a lot of time on so I launched a business course. There's two different aspects to it. One's an alumni, like long-term version that people opt into after original, and the first one's like 4 months. And it's everything that people need to get up and running or move forward. It really depends. They can come in from any angle. So we spend a lot of time either reformatting how they approach social media or building how they are going to engage in social media. And a huge aspect of how I marketed and created that course was like, your business will be and needs to be and can be rooted in yoga. It's not a separate thing. It's the same thing. It's the same kind of practice you're doing when you show up on a mat, in a meditation, whatever it is in life. If you're putting yoga into action, it's no different here in your business than anywhere else. And so I spend a lot of time with people on exactly what you said, is like this idea that it needs to be perfect. And there's a lot, and I mean, it makes sense in the yoga world if you know who's being attracted to it, that a lot of thinking about what other people are thinking. I'm like, they're not thinking about you. They're not. They're thinking about their own life. How much time are you spending thinking about somebody on the internet? You're not. Like, and if you are, it's temporary and then you move on. Like, it's not something that occupies people's minds in that kind of way. And they're really not the people that are judgmental are going to be judgmental.
Yes.
That's the same thing in real life. If somebody doesn't like you, there's nothing you can do about it. It's not your responsibility to change it. It's just, sometimes that's how people are. We don't all like each other, but they're not all going to like you. They're not all going to want to participate with you. But one of the big things I focus on with people is, who are you actually talking to? Who do you want to work with? Who is of interest to you? Because you're not talking to everyone. There's nothing wrong with wanting to master a handstand, for example. I taught that for years. I've got lots of past relationship with it. That's not who I'm looking to work with anymore. I don't offer that kind of content. So I'm not interested in speaking directly to that kind of person. Now, if it's somebody who's trying to move from a wrist injury and understanding why, and that maybe doing a bunch of handstands is part of the cause, or that's what's a limiting factor in who's participating in their classes, no problem. But that's not like, I want to master handstand in 30 days is not my person. So I don't try to speak to them. And I think that's one of the things that people feel like they've got to be perfect, is that they're trying to speak to everyone. And when you try to speak to everyone, you're speaking to no one. And so it's really kind of using yoga's tools to figure out, like, who are you? What's your duty? What's your actual purpose here? And, what is your teaching speak to, and who does it speak to? And what are the qualities that they have? Like, I work with tons of perfectionists. I know why. I have a tendency towards that in my past too. So it's really easy for me to speak to that in marketing, and I speak directly to it. Like, are you frozen in time and can't do anything because you want this to be perfect? All right, well, what is perfection? Who's setting the bar? Who's doing this? And kind of unpicking that from that yoga angle, and then really just going, okay, I'm going to ground myself in that I'm putting this out, and it's going to be really uncomfortable for a while, because I'm worried about judgment, and I'm worried about the world reacting to me. And then really sitting and reflecting, like, did that happen? Is it true? Did anyone come back and yell at you? Oh, they didn't? Oh, weird. Oh, so it's my mind making things up. Keep me frozen because I have a fear of bodily death that translates to literally anything that's scary or anything that's change. So we do a lot of, like, just get it done, repetition, refine, do it again, try. And I work a lot with, like, I don't think there's any one schedule that works for people across the board, but the more often you do it, the easier it becomes. And the biggest piece of feedback has been, like, I hated social media before. But what they find is because it's in their heads, like, they're in their heads overthinking it, worrying. And the more they did it, the more they posted, the more they came back and refined their message, figured out who they were talking to and what they had in their, business repertoire to offer that particular type of person, the easier it became. And what the report back is like, it's not hard anymore. I don't think about it. I just know, I know the steps I need to follow to create a good piece of content. I know not everyone's going to land because of all kinds of variables that are out of my control. Little yoga in that, and I put it out and I just keep doing it. And they just don't have that kind of personalization with it. It's a much looser grip. And, you know, it's that kind of idea of like, come on, be non-attached to what happens. Take the action. What comes next will be what comes next.
It's for yoga teachers in general, we actually judge ourselves so harshly. We also judge others sometimes, but we judge ourselves so harshly that it stops us from engaging with the medium. One of the things that I have personally done is set expectations for myself, right? And others who we have these conversations with is don't compare your start to someone's middle. And that line is not mine. I've heard it somewhere. Is when I started, right? There were literally probably 5 or 10 people who were actually paying attention. And back then, social media wasn't so crowded. Now it is so crowded. So you have to temper your expectations. But it is, I always tell myself this, Alex, is I do this for me. If somebody else receives benefit from it, then so be it. But I post for me. I post everything for me. And if somebody is listening to that messaging and it resonates, they know what to do. There's some action there that they can take. But I'm not putting out material so someone else will think of me in a certain way. And that shift is it's not been a shift. It's just been an approach for me. It's come naturally. I will post and I will leave. I will post and I will leave. And whoever wants to yell at me online or praise me online, I don't even pay attention to it. And I think we sit on these mediums in some form. We don't even realize it. We're looking for validation. And I have looked for it back in the day, right? I've just done this long enough to now and a few gray hairs along the way. And I know that things work differently.
Yeah.
But can you speak to that? How do we not seek validation from there? Where should the validation really come from?
So you hit the nail on the head there, and I'm going to further it a little bit. That you said I post for me, and I'm going to push that a little bit further. I feel like it's the direction that you're probably already in or on. And I post not for me, for validation, like you're saying, like that's totally different. And if that's what you're seeking, you're gonna lose long term, because the internet will not validate you forever. They'll throw you under the bus eventually, or they'll get bored and they'll leave. I post for my business based on my areas of expertise, and I post to speak to people who that might resonate with. But I have no expectation that it should look a certain way or that it will come back a certain way. I'm like, this is what I do. Here's who it's for and what it'll help them with. Then it's hands off. And it works the way it works. I listen big time to like what feedback I get from people, not in terms of if they liked or disliked something. I listen for, oh my gosh, that spoke to me. I've been in that exact situation you just talked about. Oh my gosh, that's the exact outcome I'm looking for. That's, I want to use social media with more ease. I want to be able to, use it as a marketing medium to help build my business. Okay, that's your desired outcome. I can help you walk there. But I'm going to speak to who is looking for the work that I offer and no one else. And I do that for me from the angles that I work from. I'm not worried about everybody else or, the things that aren't my area of expertise. And I'm not expecting anyone to validate me. It's work that I'm posting and content I'm posting for my business, but for the people it's designed for. And so that's all I think is like, who am I trying to talk to? Who's my ideal client? Who's looking for what I have to offer? What is their work like? What problems are they sitting in? Then I speak to them and then hands off and walk away. So really getting into the idea of like, what is it that you do? What is it that you offer? Who does that work with and for, instead of being so broad, and just really working on refining the messaging that you put out in how it speaks to who the viewer is on the other side, instead of kind of worrying about like, are they going to like it? I'm like, I don't care if they like it. I care if it speaks to the person it's designed to help or to connect with, if the tool is going to work. To go back to that idea of the frying pan with the egg that slides off of it. Those pans, I'm sure you've all seen them because they're advertised everywhere, like those Hexclad and the ceramic pans. And like, if you've ever looked at anything cooking wise, the algorithm's going to serve you ads up for that. Those pans aren't designed for professional chefs. They don't need them. They buy stainless steel pans and they can fry an egg on it perfectly well without it sticking. They're designed for the home cook who's not so great at cooking, which is perfectly fine to be not so great at cooking, but there's nothing more frustrating than trying to make an egg when you're not great at it and it's sticking to the pan. But those advertisers, they don't try to speak to the professional chef because they know the professional chef might want that pan just because they want it, but that's not their like optimal client. They speak to the optimal client. And that's how I kind of take the pressure off. It's like, who are you talking to? And then offer them the message clearer and clearer as you learn about it and as you learn what works. The rest is, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. Likes don't matter. Comments don't matter. What matters is people are, if they're clicking on your links and coming through and finding you in your offers online or in person.
I think what has happened is social media has shifted, but our mindset has not shifted fast enough with it. We are still stuck in that age of these massive followings and influencers. And something I've always thought of for myself is I don't want to influence anyone. Till today, I always tell my studio students too, like, I'm not going to convince you to do yoga. I will be teaching. If you want to come, please come. But I will not go around convincing people. But as yoga teachers, we're not looking to influence. We want to have impact. I want to have impact with my work. And we've forgotten the power of 1, 2, 5, 10. We've suddenly jumped into thousands and hundreds and thousands. And we disappoint ourselves by having those really insane metrics. And we forget that the needle has moved, but our thinking is still stuck 4, 5, 7 years ago, where influencers were a big deal. Now, I actually say don't follow big accounts. I personally don't. Actually, I don't follow many yoga teachers on the grid. I follow my friends. I follow dog accounts, things like that. Non-yoga things usually. And to actually go follow teachers in their local community and neighborhood teachers, people who are on the same growth spectrum as they are and maybe a little ahead. Have a few that you aspire to learn from and be like, and something about their messaging helps you. But just if the algorithm changes so quickly, our expectations of it also have to evolve.
Yeah, big time. And that was the thing back in the day, was like, at first, I don't think people realized that when, like Instagram, for example, started, it wasn't monetized. It was just a kind of fun thing that people did. And then there was like, well, maybe I'll get more visibility and name recognition from it. But it didn't actually really, people weren't really thinking about it like they would nowadays. Nowadays, it's a marketing medium. I mean, 90% of what you're going to get on there is going to be, if it's not people sharing pictures of their dog or like, and even if they are, they're going to be monetizing that in some way or using it to convert people to sales in some other kind of way. So unless it's like pictures of your kids and it's a private account, like most of it is a big marketing platform. And you can like that or not, but it's what it is.
Yeah.
It's what it's become. And you might as well accept it for what it is. And there is this huge misconception that like the bigger the account, the more conversions or the more expertise the person has. No, sorry. It's not the way that it works. Not at all. Big accounts can make no money. Big accounts can be people who have no idea what they're talking about. And vice versa can be true. And then the other can be true too. It can be a small account that doesn't know what they're talking about and isn't making any money, or it could be a small account that does and is making a good living off of their great work. So it's none of those metrics really measure up. It's like, what message are they putting out? And I say the same thing too. I'm like, if what you're following is making you miserable, if what you're following is making you insecure, if what you're following isn't building your understanding of yourself or in like how you teach or how you practice, then unfollow it or mute it. I'm the same way.
Yes.
I don't follow
Yeah.
things that bother me because it's my time and my brain space.
Correct.
I'm also not a scroller. I'm old, so I don't care to. I never learned to do that. The people I follow are all teachers I work with
Mm-hmm.
or friends of mine, or I follow artists and like graphic designers and things like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's it. So otherwise, I spend my time looking at the people's work who I help and work with,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll scroll their stuff, but I'm not going to scroll the explore page because I
Yeah.
don't care. I
Yeah.
don't,
Same.
it's not, it doesn't help my brain. It
Yeah.
doesn't help my understanding of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I often refer to social media, Instagram, because that's the only one I use, as email with pictures and videos. And would I be sitting and scrolling email
Yeah.
every single minute of the day? No. And I'm with you. I'm old too. I did not even understand doom scrolling till late last year when I finally figured out that if you swipe up on a reel, it gives you more. Can you believe that? I learned that a few months ago.
Or, yeah.
So, and I was like, oh,
I know. I don't do it either. I didn't know what it was either.
I was like, oh, so
I was
this
like,
is
what?
what is
You do
doom
what with your-
scrolling. Yeah. I was like, how does everybody spend 4 hours on this? And then I figured there's the swipe up. Anyway, how much of, and I know this is different for different people, but according to you, how much of your personal self does one need to put out?
Yeah.
Should it be completely only professional things? Should there be a bit of personalization? What are your thoughts on that?
The way that I work with that with people, it's very different in personal, like you're saying, how much people are willing or comfortable sharing. And there's a couple of different, I only use Instagram as well. And there's a couple of different mediums on there and you can consider them differently. So your feed is for people who follow you, but your feed posts, anything on your profile grid is largely also going to be for new people who haven't followed you yet. It's a place for them to kind of go find what you're up to, who you are, and those posts stay unless you archive them. So they're kind of always there. On that, I usually recommend people don't really spend much time sharing personal stuff there because it's kind of, like, what is your work about? It's more about the viewer and what they have going on, and do they connect with your work and what you have to offer. That's how I would think about a grid post. Your stories are where you get to serve up a little bit more of your personal world. The joke I always make is like, you don't go to like Coca-Cola's page and see like the CEO saying like Happy Father's Day, like a picture of him with his dad, like on Coke's,
Main
feed.
feed.
Like that would be weirdly personal. And you can use that. Some people like doing that a little bit more than others, but I would think about it more like they're not really there getting to know you. They're getting to know what you're about, what your work is about on your feed. Your stories is where they get to know you. Those disappear in 24 hours. They're a place where you can post more of kind of your day-to-day stuff. But I would still, even your day-to-day stuff, you're trying to relate it to what they're looking for, right? So like, I don't generally personally post a lot of like my personal life in full. It's just not who I am. I'm like, you want to see what? Like, why? We're not friends. Like, you don't know me intimately in some personal way. So it feels very obtrusive to me, but that's not everyone. But stories are a place where you can like be deeply personal and kind of show people what your world is about, because who looks at your stories aren't people coming to follow you. They're your most like engaged audience. That's who's there on your stories. So you may as well let them know a little bit about your world to whatever degree you're comfortable with. But it's really, really personal how you do that. But I always look like, if you want to share your personal life really deeply, I'd have a personal page for that, where people are there to see that part of your world. And they might overlap a little bit, but otherwise I always think about it personally as a business. And I tend to work with people who have a harder time sharing the personal part of their world. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. Let's make this a business page where you get to show the parts of yourself that are relevant to your work and that will connect like you would in a studio class, right? Like, you're not sharing the intimate details of the argument you had with your partner last night, on hopefully with class. So you don't have to do that.
Oh, you never know. Some teachers might.
I know they do. I actually know they do. But that's one where I'm just like, okay, that's not my ideal client. I'm not working with that kind of person on road, because that's just you resonate with the people
Mhm.
that are, in a similar vein to you. So I'm like, fine, you don't want to share everything. How do you connect with people so you don't seem like a robot when you're
Mm,
teaching
mhm,
class? Like,
mhm.
what little bits of yourself do you engage with people when you're saying hello, when you're saying goodbye? Like, that's the kind of stuff that you can put in stories. It doesn't have to be like the deepest recesses of
Mhm,
your, personal world, especially if that's not comfortable with. Because
mhm,
that's more about you, huh? Not about them,
mhm.
not about the viewer. That's when it becomes like deeply kind of self-centric in a certain kind of way.
I also think that some people think that when you're sharing parts of your personal life, you got to share everything. No, I always say choose three things you will share, three or five things.
Yeah.
Like I will share pictures and videos of my dog. I think a lot of my followers come for him versus me and the yoga. And so I have the dog. And then I have some of my crafts and hobbies that I'm not really good at that I will keep posting. And then I post about my cup of
Yep.
chai and my obsession with tea. And and that's kind of it. If I go
There you
for a
go.
hike, I will post a picture of where the hike is. I rarely will show my face and be like, I don't stuff my face into everything. I don't want to. So it's
Yep.
this thing I never
Exactly.
show. My husband's never on it. My closest friends are never on it.
Yep. I've
My
heard.
deepest personal life
Yep. Mine
is
either.
not on the grid in any form. So
Nope.
and if anyone shares a very personal, like it was my birthday last month, and there were so many birthday wishes, pictures, I didn't share anything because I don't want people to know boundaries, right? And to
Yep.
decide that
I'm with
for
you.
yourself.
Yep.
Nobody wants to see you 24/7 there anyway. That's how I see it. But Alex, something my teacher once told us in our first graduation speech, like 14 years ago at this point, and he said, follow the yoga, not the person. And to me, that has
Yes.
been an
Yes.
invisible anchor in so many moments. And I see not just yoga,
Totally.
I'm also a Bollywood dance performer, instructor. I have a studio for that. And I notice a difference of having entered this world pre reels, pre social media, and how I show up in my business versus just trying to be online for attention and doing anything for attention online. So that follow the yoga, not
Mm.
the person, is something I use as a filter or a checkpoint online as well. And the question
Done.
I'm trying to get to is if there were a few actionable suggestions that you want to leave for teachers listening, what would those be?
I love that phrase because that's exactly it, right? Is
Mhm.
if that's the difference between an influencer and a teacher, right? Or somebody running a business. If you don't like what you're doing online, then you're not going to be able to do it forever. And if you're making money off your body and what it can do and how it looks, that's not a career. That's not a business. That's a short-term job that is
Mhm.
highly unsustainable.
Mhm.
And I watch so many teachers try to chase that and feel obligated to that. So if that's what you're doing and you think that there's so much addiction around that, like nobody's going to come. I'm like, but they're not coming for that anyway. Or I'm not going to be able to build my business because those are the only photos or posts that get likes. It's not true. You haven't built the alternative yet. And you have to figure out and learn how to build the alternative. So that's one big bit is like, if you don't love it and you don't like it and you're forcing yourselves to do things that you feel kind of creepy about or like you're hurting yourself to do, please stop doing that. It's seriously not worth it long term. The other bit is I have a fortunate background where I've worked in these fields before. Most yoga teachers didn't.
Yeah, me neither.
It's a skill.
Mhm.
It's a skill you have to learn.
Mhm.
And some people are inclined towards it and they can kind of teach themselves.
Mhm.
But some aren't. And there's a lot of advice in the yoga world out there, or not in the yoga world, outside the yoga world. Like there's a lot of social media advice of like,
Mhm.
do this, do that, do this, do that. The hardest bit about that is it's not tailored for the yoga world, which
Mhm.
is different. It's a really different world than trying to, I don't know, whatever your, coaching business or selling a frying pan. It's different. And honing in on the messaging, I find is really, really hard for people because they haven't kind of leaned into the philosophical part as
Yeah.
much as maybe they need to, or they just don't have the skill of graphic design or visual communication. They feel inclined towards photos and they think that's the only way to really communicate. And they need some tangible skills. And so I'd recommend just find someone that does that stuff and learn it. It's a skill just
Yes.
like you learned to teach.
Mhm.
No different. And there's nothing, yes, it's going to take work. It's going to take time. It'll be frustrating at first. You'll get better at it the longer you do it. But it's really worth kind of not just shooting in the dark and hoping you figure out what works if that's not your background or inclination. Having an artistic eye isn't something that everybody comes with. You can develop it though, but you usually need somebody to kind of help you with that. So get some help. Like just spend, I know it's like, oh my gosh, but it costs money and I'm not making enough to cover that. I'll tell you, the biggest and best investment I made was actually in someone who could help me with sales stuff when I reached my limit. I reached my capacity. We all do in certain ways and need people to see outside of ourselves and to have somebody else's eyes on things. And it was a huge financial leap for me to make. Best decision I ever made in my life. It paid back just in so many different ways, including financial. So I just recommend, like, even if it's like, don't go into, debt hugely for it or something like that, but make it work. Like if you need help and it's a little bit like, oh God, make the leap, do it. It's totally worth it. And then get out of your own way.
Yes.
Literally get out of your own way. Stop thinking about everybody else. Stop worrying about what people are going to think. Just post and go. Like, be as edgy as you can be and tolerate at the moment. Be as refined in your messaging. And instead of speaking from the I angle, speak to them from you, your, instead of using I, me, mine, use you, your, their, our, if you want to be collective, fine. But like, speak to the viewer, not from yourself. When you take the I, me, mine out of it, you take the personal judgment part out of it because you're not talking about you anymore. You're talking about what's happening in the collective or what their experience is, which really changes how you interact with the medium, because what feedback you get back isn't about you anymore, because the post literally wasn't about you. You can include your own, like, I've been there too. I know what this is like, but I'm speaking to you now and what you're going through because I have some tools that you might want. And that really just changes things. If you can speak to them and from use those descriptors, I don't know the grammatical word. So stupid with that. Canadians didn't learn grammar in English when I was going to school. We learned it in French instead. You could just speak from that angle. It really becomes a lot easier.
No, that's great advice. And I really hope that the listeners will pause on that. It's not only about you. Start making it more about them. Speak to them. How will they benefit from it? Put the spotlight on the students or the potential students. And that'll just do wonders for you creating all this content and being okay with putting yourself out there. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and doing this. And I hope that anyone who wants to know more, be more skillful in this, I will add all the links to your courses, your social media, all of that in the show notes. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. It was so good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. Thank you so much for listening. Everything we referred to today will be found at letstalk.yoga/listen. Make sure you are on the monthly newsletter for free yoga teacher enrichment resources. I will see you next week with another conversation and another guest. Until then, enjoy your practice. Take care. Bye-bye.